my cousin boasted. "I transferred our grandfather's stocks into my name, and you'll never get them back." I thought she had won until the bank called. Actually, the transaction was flagged. Her smug face vanished instantly. Danielle always had a way of getting under my skin. She was one of those people who thought the world owed her something just for existing. In her mind, she was the golden child of the family. Every gathering, she found some way to brag. Whether it was a new car her dad paid for, a luxury trip she didn't lift a finger to afford, or some exclusive party she managed to get into. It was exhausting, but nothing compared to the night she smirked at me over dinner and dropped her little bombshell. To understand how we got here, you need to know about our grandfather. He was a self-made man, old school, who built his wealth through years of smart investments, hard work, and discipline. He wasn't a billionaire, but he did well for himself. Stocks, rental properties, and a sharp reputation until the very end. Grandpa always made it clear that his assets were to be split evenly among his grandkids. It was in his will. No debates, no special treatment. Danielle thought that was unfair. She believed she deserved more because she was the closest to him, which was complete garbage. She only visited when she wanted something, usually money. Meanwhile, I visited regularly because I actually loved the man. When he passed, I was heartbroken, but at least his wishes would be followed. Or so I thought. After the funeral, the family started sorting through Grandpa's estate. Properties, bank accounts, stocks. That's when I noticed something was off. While reviewing paperwork with a lawyer, I saw a huge chunk of stocks missing. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe something in the process of being distributed. But after digging deeper, I found out someone had already transferred them. To Danielle. I couldn't believe it. I asked the lawyer how that was even possible. Shouldn't the stocks have been frozen until the estate was settled? Shouldn't they have gone through probate? That's when the bomb dropped. Danielle had gained access to Grandpa's brokerage account before he passed. She convinced him to add her as a joint account holder months earlier, probably by guilt-tripping him. And after he died, she made her move. Since her name was already on the account, she had the authority to transfer the stocks to herself before the will could be executed. Technically, it wasn't even illegal, just unethical. A scummy, underhanded move. I was furious. That night at dinner, I confronted her. She didn't even try to deny it, just grinned like a cat that swallowed a canary. "I transferred Grandpa's stocks into my name," she said. "You'll never get them back." Then my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered. "Hello. Hi, this is Mr. Reynolds from First National Bank. Is this my name?" "Yes. I wanted to inform you that there's been some unusual activity regarding your late grandfather's account. A flagged transaction. We need to discuss." Danielle's smirk vanished. Heart pounding. I stepped away from the table. "What do you mean, flagged?" "The stock transfer made after your grandfather's passing was marked as suspicious due to the timing and the account holder status. We put a temporary hold on the assets pending an internal investigation." I nearly dropped my phone. "You're saying she didn't actually get them?" "For now, they're frozen. If anything improper is found, the transaction could be reversed." I turned back to Danielle. Her face had gone from cocky to pale as a sheet. She must have figured out what the call was about, because she started stammering. You can't do that. It was legally transferred." I hung up and smiled. "Actually, Danielle, the bank can, and it sounds like they just did." Panic set in. She scrambled to argue, but the damage was done. And this was just the beginning. Danielle shot up from her seat, knocking over her chair. The room went silent. My aunt and uncle, the ones who spoiled her rotten, looked confused. "What's going on?" her dad asked. She didn't answer. Too busy pulling out her phone, fingers flying across the screen as she tried to access her account. I watched her expression twist from frustration to pure terror. I took my time walking back to the table, letting her panic sink in. Then I leaned in, just loud enough for her to hear. They froze the stocks. She turned to me, disbelief and rage written all over her face. No, they can't. The transfer was legal. The account was mine. I shrugged. Guess the bank disagrees. She lost it. Danielle spun toward her dad. You need to call the lawyer. Now. Her dad, who had spent years covering for her nonsense, looked uneasy. Danielle slowed down. What are you talking about? She threw her phone onto the table. The room, filled with casual dinner conversation minutes ago, was now thick with tension. My uncle, always the peacemaker, rubbed his temples. I thought you said the transfer was yours to make? Danielle let out a shaky laugh, like she still couldn't believe what was happening. It was, Grandpa put me on the account. That means I had every right to move them. My mom, who had been quiet through all this, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. That's not what the will says. Danielle whipped her head toward her. Wills don't matter if the money is already gone. And there it was, the loophole she thought had made her untouchable. The problem? She had been too cocky, moved too fast, and now it was all unraveling. The next morning, I called the bank. I needed to know exactly what was happening. Mr. Reynolds, the same rep from the night before, sounded even more serious. We've reviewed the transaction, he said. Due to the timing and the account holder's recent passing, we've determined that it falls under a category known as suspicious activity involving estate assets. I grinned. Meaning what exactly? We've escalated it to our legal team. If it's determined to be an improper transfer, the stocks will be returned to the estate. We've also flagged the activity for potential fraud. Fraud. I had to take a deep breath to keep myself from laughing. This was so much worse for Danielle than she realized. Later that day, the family lawyer, Mr. Calloway, called a meeting. Danielle showed up, but she was nothing like the smug person from the night before. She looked wrecked, smudged makeup, messy hair, the desperate energy of someone watching their life burn down. She still tried to play it cool. This is a misunderstanding, she said as soon as Mr. Calloway barely even looked at her. He pulled out a folder and laid it on the table. The bank flagged your transaction because it was made after your grandfather's death. Under the law, all assets should have gone through probate. By bypassing that process, you not only acted unethically, but you may have committed fraud. Danielle's hands clenched into fists. But he put me on the account. That makes it mine. Mr. Calloway nodded slowly. That's true, except for one important detail. He flipped to another page. Your grandfather was under medical care when that change was made. His records show that at the time, he was on strong medication, which means there's a possibility that he wasn't in a state to make financial decisions. Danielle paled. That's not. Calloway didn't let her finish. If that's the case, then any changes made during that time could be challenged in court. And if we take this to a judge, you will lose. Silence. Pure, heavy silence. Then Danielle did something I never expected. She turned to me and begged. I'll give you half, she blurted. Just don't take me to court. We don't have to do this. I'll split them with you, okay? I leaned back, crossing my arms. Oh, now you want to share? Her voice cracked. I was trying to secure my future. I just thought I deserved more. I let that sink in. I thought about Grandpa, about how hard he worked, about how he had trusted her, and about how she had spit on that trust the second she saw an opening. So I smiled. No deal. Danielle thought she could weasel her way out. She probably assumed she could manipulate her parents into bailing her out, maybe even get a slap on the wrist. She had no idea how bad it was about to get. After I refused her pathetic offer, she tried to run damage control. She hired a lawyer, a sleazy guy who clearly specialized in getting spoiled rich kids out of trouble. He started throwing around words like misunderstanding and family dispute. But the bank wasn't playing games. They had flagged the transaction as potential fraud, and that meant they were bringing in the feds. A few weeks later, Danielle got a letter in the mail. She must have thought it was just some legal notice from the estate, maybe another boring probate document. But no, it was a formal notice from the Securities and Exchange Commission. What Danielle didn't realize was that moving stocks in a shady way, especially after someone dies, is a huge deal. Because some of Grandpa's stocks were in publicly traded companies, the SEC had to review the transaction. And let's just say they didn't like what they saw. The feds started digging, and the more they dug, the worse it got for her. They found emails. They found texts. Danielle had been planning this for months. She had emailed a friend bragging about how she had found a loophole to take the stocks before anyone could stop her. She had texted her boyfriend, who later broke up with her, by the way, saying, "I'm going to be so rich though, they can't do SH*T about it." Oh, but we could. At first, her parents were in full denial. They swore up and down that this was all some mistake, that Grandpa wanted her to have the stocks, that the rest of us were just being jealous and vindictive. But when the SEC started making real legal threats, that changed. The moment they realized their precious daughter was facing federal charges, the panic set in, and then came the bankruptcy bombshell. Danielle wasn't as rich as she pretended to be. She had debt, a lot of it, credit card bills, personal loans, some shady investment in a failed influencer brand. She had been counting on those stocks to bail her out, and now they were gone. The state's legal team wasn't done. Since Danielle had fraudulently taken estate assets, we had grounds to sue her personally. And we did. Her parents tried to negotiate. They begged us to be reasonable. They even offered to pay a settlement to make it go away. But by that point, it wasn't about the money. It was about justice. We took her to court, and we won. Danielle was ordered to pay back every cent she had tried to steal, with interest plus legal fees. She was completely wiped out. I thought that was it. I figured she'd just disappear and try to rebuild whatever was left of her life. I was wrong. A few months later, I got a call from one of my cousins. They were laughing. Danielle got arrested. I almost dropped my phone. Wait, what? Turns out, during the SEC investigation, they found another fraud scheme she had been running. She had been forging checks from her parents' business to keep up her lifestyle. And guess what? That's a felony. She was arrested, charged, and ended up serving actual jail time. Danielle went from a smug, spoiled brat bragging about stealing stocks to a convicted felon with no money, no reputation, and no future. Last I heard, she was working at a diner, trying to start over. And honestly, I don't feel bad for her. She did this to herself. Grandpa's legacy stayed intact. The estate was settled fairly. And karma? It did its job. But karma wasn't done with her yet. After she got out of jail, she tried to rebuild. She moved back in with her parents, what was left of them. The lawsuit we won didn't just drain her accounts. Her parents had co-signed some of her debts, thinking they were just helping their golden child succeed. They had backed her financially for years, never thinking she could actually lose everything. But when the courts ruled against her, that debt didn't magically disappear. Her parents had to sell their house. The fancy, overpriced house Danielle grew up in? Gone. The cars? Gone. Her parents ended up in a tiny rental, struggling to stay afloat. And Danielle? She had to get job waiting tables at a dingy little diner just to afford rent in a rundown apartment. One day, a few of my cousins and I decided to grab a meal at that exact diner. Not to be cruel, just to see for ourselves. And there she was, Danielle, wearing a stained apron, her hair pulled into a messy bun, looking like she hadn't slept in days. She saw us, and for a second I thought she might run, but she didn't. She walked up to the table, barely able to look us in the eye. "What can I get you?" she mumbled. We ordered. She scribbled it down, turned, and walked away without another word. The whole meal, she avoided us. But when she brought the check, I made sure I was the one to take it. I pulled out my wallet, took out a crisp $100 bill, and set it on the table. "Keep the change." She froze. Her eyes flickered from the money to me, her face twisting into something between shame and rage. And then I smiled. Looks like I did get Grandpa's money back after all. She didn't say a word. She just took the bill, her hand shaking, and walked away. And just like that, that was the last time I ever saw her. Justice served. Grandpa's legacy stayed protected. The estate was fairly divided, just like it was meant to be. And Danielle? She spent the rest of her life learning what happens when you try to cheat family. In the end, she lost everything. And I never lost a single night of sleep.